The Middle East is one of the most unstable regions in the world. In the 20th century alone, there were more than 7 major conflicts here. In this video, we'll look at 100 years of Middle Eastern history. At the beginning of the last century, almost the entire territory of the Middle East was under the control of the Ottoman Empire, which had ruled it for 4 centuries. The rest was under the rule of Britain and Persia. Seeking to expand their influence, Britain and Russia signed an agreement dividing spheres of influence in Persia. Persia itself, of course, did not participate in the agreement. A year later, the British discovered oil in Persia. After the Ottomans lost vast territories in the Balkans and Libya, the outbreak of World War I heralded the end of their imperial rule. In 1914, to protect its oil fields, Britain landed troops at El Faw and seized the fortresses and coastal territories of the Persian Gulf. In the east, British and Russian troops occupied neutral Persia to protect their interests. Within the Ottoman Empire itself, the situation only worsened due to the ongoing policy of centralization and defeats on the front lines. The Ottomans rapidly lose control over territories in the Middle East. In an attempt to find someone to blame for the defeats of recent years, in a territory predominantly inhabited by local indigenous Christians, the Ottoman Empire carries out ethnic cleansing that effectively amounts to genocide against Greeks, Assyrians, Armenians, and Yazidi Kurds. On May 16th, Great Britain, France, Russia, and Italy sign a secret Sykes-Picot agreement regarding the division of spheres of influence and occupation within the territories of the Ottoman Empire. Just a year later, the provisional government in Russia would be overthrown, and in November 1917, the secret agreement would cease to be secret. This would lead to a scandal involving the Arabs. But while the agreement, fueled by Britain, remained secret, the Arab revolt began in 1916, with the British officer Lawrence of Arabia playing a decisive role in its coordination. After the capture of Jeddah, the rebels proclaimed the establishment of the Kingdom of Hejaz. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire suffered defeat after defeat at the hands of the Russian Empire's army in the Caucasus and concentrated all its forces there to defend Asia Minor. This allowed the British to fully capitalize on the opportunity to seize Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, along with the city of Baghdad. At the same time, Britain concluded an agreement with Qatar, establishing a British protectorate. Qatar became part of the empire. Due to the Ottoman Empire's internal and external problems, the Mudros Armistice was signed on October 30, 1918, aboard a British ship, 11 days before Germany's surrender. The Ottoman Empire was defeated in the Great War. It can be said that it was precisely after the defeat of the Ottoman Empire that a new phase in the history of the Middle East began. Following the empire's defeat, the Entente sought to maximize the benefits of its victory, so it imposed the Treaty of Sèvres on Turkey, which effectively divided Turkey into occupation zones controlled by Italy, France, and Britain, while also ceding parts of the territory to Greece and Armenia as compensation for the genocide. Obviously, the Turks were not satisfied with this turn of events, which ultimately led to a military confrontation with the Entente powers. Meanwhile, new rulers took hold of the former Ottoman territories. Following the publication of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the Arab peoples of Syria and Lebanon resolved to establish their own nation-states. But after negotiations with France completely broke down, hostilities began, during which 3 months later, the French occupied Damascus and dissolved the Arab Kingdom of Syria. France gained control of the territories of modern-day Syria and Lebanon, while Britain took control of Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine. Very soon, in 1920, fearing full incorporation into Britain, an anti-British uprising began in Iraq, demanding the creation of an independent nation-state. The uprising was quickly suppressed under the command of War Minister Winston Churchill. In 1921, Yemen and Neh gained independence. At this time, following Egypt's bloodless revolution against British rule and several months of strikes and the suppression of peaceful protests, the British Empire unilaterally and formally recognized Egypt's independence. And while some gained independence, albeit largely formal but bloodless, in Turkey, Kemal's forces were fighting against all the major world powers, and they did so quite successfully. This allowed them to conclude the struggle for independence in 1923 by signing the Treaty of Lausanne. Turkey's territory was defined within its modern borders, with the exception of the Alexandretta Sanjak, which was returned to Turkey only in June 1939. In March 1924, the king of Hejaz proclaimed himself the new caliph of the Islamic world. But as a result of the ensuing war, Hejaz was conquered by Najd, and the joint kingdom of Najd and Hejaz was formed, which would later become Saudi Arabia. In 1925, one of the largest anti-colonial uprisings took place. In Syria, representatives of nearly all segments of the population launched an uprising that soon spread across the entire country. Guerrilla activities would continue for 2 years until 1927, when they were ultimately suppressed by French troops. Following the turbulent changes in the region at the turn of the century, from 1927 onward, the Middle East, under the rule of the major empires, remained a region of unrest. The Kingdom of Iraq, established as early as the 1920s, did not gain independence from Britain until 1932 and joined the League of Nations. At the same time, the kingdoms of Najd and Hejaz were finally united into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In the French-controlled territory of Syria, the Syrian Republic was proclaimed, though it did not receive even formal independence from France. Meanwhile, in the south of the Arabian Peninsula, a new conflict had been brewing for several years. After nearly a decade under Saudi Arabian protection, the Emirate of Asir sought to restore its former rights. But it faces expected resistance from the Saudis, which ultimately results in the Emirate's annexation into the country. Dissatisfied with this turn of events, Yemen soon starts a war, which it quickly loses, but thanks to Britain, it does not lose its territories. In 1936, an agreement was reached between Great Britain and Egypt, under which Egypt became a fully independent state, but British troops were allowed to remain in the Suez Canal zone for another 20 years, until 1956. After Italy's annexation of Albania and the strengthening of Germany's influence in the Balkans, Turkey, concerned for its security, began negotiations with Britain and France to form an alliance. A tripartite British-French-Turkish treaty of friendship and mutual assistance was signed. While not technically an alliance, it demonstrated Turkey's desire to align with the Allied powers. As would later become clear, Turkey would attempt to join the victors throughout the war. That same year, Turkey requested the return of the Alexandretta Sancak. In June, it became part of the Turkish Republic. After the fall of France and the establishment of the Vichy puppet regime, Vichy France brought all of France's former colonies under its control, but the government in exile led by de Gaulle had no intention of accepting this. After France's surrender, Turkey, while maintaining its alliance with Great Britain, concluded a friendship and non-aggression pact with Hitler's Germany. Nevertheless, the first signs of war in the Middle East came from Libya. Italian troops invaded Egyptian territory, but were quickly halted with the help of British forces. In early 1941, pro-German leaders in Iraq launched an uprising supported by Germany and Vichy-controlled Syria. In response, British troops launched a military operation in Iraq and, within a month, completely suppressed the uprising and stationed their contingent on Iraqi territory. The very next month, British troops, together with the Free French Army, carried out Operation Exporter to capture Lebanon and Syria. By the end of July, the operation ends in a victory for the Allies. After Germany's attack on the USSR, Turkey declared its neutrality and mobilized its population, including those over 60 years of age. Because of this, both the USSR and the British had doubts about the preservation of its neutrality. In August, Iran attempted to refuse the United Kingdom and the USSR permission to station their troops on Iranian territory, but British and Soviet troops simply invaded Iran, just as they had in World War I. By the start of 1942, virtually the entire Middle East was in the hands of the Allies, or neutral countries, with the exception of Western Egypt. It was there that the main confrontation between Germany and Britain unfolded in 1942. Throughout the year, British and German troops took turns defeating each other, forcing the other to retreat. By the end of the year, Montgomery, commander of the British Eighth Army, had pushed Rommel back to the border of Libya and Tunisia. In Iran, the Allies adopted an agreement to restore the country's sovereignty, but this had no effect on the course of the occupation. Troops continued to remain on the country's territory. In the north, following a successful start to its offensive on Stalingrad and the Caucasus, Turkey began a new wave of mobilization. The size of the army reached 1 million men. But after the Soviet Union's successful operations on the Eastern Front and the landing in Italy, the question of Turkey entering the war on the side of the Axis powers was no longer on the table. Now Britain and the United States tried to persuade Turkey to enter the war on the side of the Allies as soon as possible, promising preferential treatment. However, Turkey, rejecting these requests, maintained a neutrality that benefited Germany and continued to supply chromite ore and other strategic resources. It was not until 1944, following threats from the Allies and the suspension of arms supplies, that Turkey ceased its trade cooperation with Germany. And in 1945, it declared war on Germany but did not participate in combat operations. After the end of World War II, the Middle East faced a new period of territorial division. France's mandate to administer Syria and Lebanon, which had ended as early as 1943, did not allow the countries to free themselves from the presence of French troops on their territory until 1945. Immediately, the Syrian Republic laid claim to the Turkish province of Hatay, formerly the Alexandretta Sanjak. That same year, the Kingdom of Transjordan gained independence from Britain. The League of Arab States was established in Cairo. Its members include Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Transjordan, and Yemen. After 5 years of occupation, Iran is liberated from British and Soviet forces. Oil production begins in Saudi Arabia. The massive oil fields discovered as early as 1938 would enable the future country to embark on rapid development, largely due to production costs 10 to 15 times lower than those in the United States. Amid active decolonization, the issue of British Palestine, whose mandate was nearing its end, became acute. A proposal was made at the UN to divide the territory into Jewish and Arab sectors. And, as was to be expected, this scenario sparked fierce protests from Arab countries. After Britain's withdrawal from Palestine, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the establishment of an independent Jewish state on the territory designated by the UN. Almost immediately, the League of Arab States declared war on a state that did not yet exist and launched an active military offensive. After a year of fighting, a ceasefire agreement was reached in July 1949 with Egypt, Lebanon, Transjordan, and Syria. The early 1950s saw the start of active oil production in Qatar, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, while in Iran, protests began against the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, and the movement for the nationalization of oil production gained mass support. In 1951, Iran passed a law nationalizing the oil industry. In response, the US and the UK announced a boycott of Iranian oil and began planning a coup in the country. On August 19th, Iran's leader was overthrown, and the general who came to power soon restored US and UK oil concessions and re-established diplomatic relations with them. That same year, Turkey, the only country in the Middle East, joined the newly formed NATO alliance. In Qatar in 1952, slavery was abolished following prolonged protests. In 1956, Israel joined the alliance of the United Kingdom and France, which sought to regain control of the Suez Canal. After the capture of the Sinai Peninsula during the Suez Crisis, Israel was forced to withdraw under pressure from the United States and the Soviet Union. In 1958, Arab states began to unite into federations. Iraq and Jordan formed the Arab Federation of Iraq and Jordan, but this entity lasted only 6 months. Egypt was more successful in uniting with Syria to form the United Arab Republic. Yemen later joined the Union. In 1961, Syria withdrew from the United Arab Republic. That same year, Kuwait gained independence from Britain and joined the League of Arab States. As they prepared their troops for a new confrontation with Israel, Egypt and Syria signed a military alliance. Jordan would later join it. In 1967, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan massed their troops along Israel's borders and blocked Israeli ships from entering the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. In a radio address, the Egyptian president called on the Arab states to drive Israel into the sea. These actions provided the Israeli leadership with a pretext for a preemptive strike and the start of the war that went down in history as the Six-Day War. Israel achieved a decisive and swift victory in the war. It captured the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. That same year, the Federation of South Arabia, previously under British protectorate, gained independence. In 1971, Qatar gained independence from Britain and signed a treaty of friendship and cooperation with Britain. That same year, a large-scale oil and gas condensate field was discovered. Active oil production began in the country in 1974. That same year, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Oman also gained independence. All of them joined the League of Arab States. And once again, relations between the Arabs and Israel deteriorated sharply. This time, the initiative was entirely in the hands of Egypt and Syria, which struck suddenly and simultaneously on two fronts. But this did not prevent Israel from relatively quickly first halting and then continuing the war on enemy territory even before the peace treaty was signed. Although the war, known as the Yom Kippur War, ended successfully for Israel, the country's unpreparedness for war caused unrest and the overthrow of the government. In 1973, another significant historical event occurred, the oil crisis. It was the first such crisis and is still considered the largest. At that time, the major Arab oil exporting countries refused to supply oil to Western nations that had supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War. As a result, oil prices skyrocketed and an economic crisis began in many countries. Exports resumed a year later, but the crisis exposed the West's dependence on oil. In the West, following prolonged ethnic tensions and the marginalization of Turks, a military-backed coup took place in Cyprus in 1974, bringing Nikos Samson to power, who sought to annex Cyprus to Greece. Seizing the moment, Turkey sent a military contingent to restore constitutional order, which effectively led to the division of the island into Cyprus and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which to this day is recognized only by Turkey. A civil war began in Lebanon, which, with interruptions, would continue into the 1990s. In 1978, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat made a historic visit to Israel. This event marked the first step toward the recognition of the State of Israel by the head of an Arab state. On March 26, 1979, the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty was signed, under which Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt and committed to beginning negotiations on the establishment of Palestinian autonomy. In Iraq in 1979, following a coup, Saddam Hussein came to power. In the Middle East and Iran, one of the most famous revolutions took place, during which Iran became the Islamic Republic of Iran. In practice, this meant that the country had become a theocracy, meaning that the country's fundamental laws were derived from sacred texts rather than legislative documents. Just a year later, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein laid claim to an oil-rich region in western Iran and launched the Iran-Iraq War. After 2 years of war, Iran fully liberated its territories and now intended to launch an offensive into Iraqi territory. In 1988, following a counterattack by Iraqi forces supported by the US, Iran and Iraq signed a peace treaty ending the war that had lasted 8 years. No territorial changes occurred. In 1990, Iraq launched a military operation against Kuwait, which had previously supported it in the war against Iran. Unable to mount a defense, Kuwait was occupied within 2 days and soon incorporated into Iraq. The resulting problems with oil supplies forced Western democracies and many Arab countries to launch a war in the Gulf against Iraq. At the same time, in the south of the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen, which had been divided following a long period of rivalry, united to form the Republic of Yemen. In Lebanon, a 15-year civil war comes to an end. Following successful operations against Iraq, Iraqi forces are forced to retreat northward and, as they move, employ scorched earth tactics, setting fire to Kuwait's oil rigs. By the most conservative estimates, this tactic caused $50 billion in losses for Kuwait. The war ends that same year. Kuwait's government and independence are restored, and sanctions are imposed on Iraq. A year after the events of September 11th, President George W. Bush accuses Iraq and other rogue states of supporting terrorist groups and developing weapons of mass destruction. In 2003, the Iraq War begins. The Americans and their allies seek to topple Saddam Hussein's regime. After a prolonged and bloody conflict, the Americans launched an attack on one of Saddam Hussein's possible hideouts. Shortly thereafter, his death was confirmed. Following the withdrawal of US troops from Iraq in 2009, the Arab Spring began a year later. These uprisings led to changes in government in a number of Arab countries: Jordan, Yemen, Egypt, Lebanon, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Iraq. But perhaps the most well-known event for us occurred in Syria, where the Arab Spring sparked a civil war that continues to this day. In 2019, the ongoing US-Iran conflict began, triggered by Iranian scientists' development of nuclear weapons in violation of earlier agreements with the United States. We've reached 2020. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and give it a thumbs up.